All right, so as part of our unit on revolutions, this is going to cover the English Civil War, which would be the second part of Unit 5 that we will cover. So, we're talking first about the English Civil War. This is going to be kind of a description of that. The picture here, it shows the difference between the royalists and the parliamentarians. So this is kind of a big war between the people of England. So the British Revolution. So the point of the revolutions, it shows how Parliament aggrandized political power in England from 1603 to 1760. We know we talked about the Enlightenment era. This kind of is going on through all of this. And it's a prelude to the English Civil War, which begins around 1603. So there were other British revolutions that were kind of happening prior to that, and then everything kind of led to a boiling point, and then all of England kind of starts to fight with each other. Okay, so remember we talked about the divine right of kingship, the belief that a king derives his power from God, the king's power is absolute. We mentioned Parliament, which is a bicameral legislative body in England. Bicameral means two houses. We'll talk about this more when you become a senior and you enter my government class. Now, we mentioned the Puritans. The Puritans, they wanted, or they were opponents to the Church of England, and they wanted to purify Catholic remnants. So if you remember, we talked about this big split between the church. Henry VIII got mad that he couldn't divorce his wife, so he leaves. He creates the Church of England, which is separate from the Catholic Church. And now the Puritans is another group of people who they're kind of relatives to Protestantism in a way, and they want to purify Catholic remnants, but they also disagree with the Church of England. We'll also talk about Puritans later when we look at the settlement of the Americas. So we have what is known as the Great Migration from 1630 to 1643. The Puritans seek religious freedom in English colonies in America, so they leave Europe. They want to try to find a place where they can worship freely. Now, a royalist, which you'll need to know for this unit, a royalist is a group in Parliament who back the position of the monarch. So that means they are servants of the king, they're supporters of the king, they agree with everything the king is doing. What you'll need to know here, Commonwealth. Commonwealth is a state governed by elected representatives. So, for example, it's kind of like a republic, which is what the United States has. But for example, they have the Commonwealth of England or the Commonwealth of Great Britain. But this just means that they are elect their representatives as an indirect form of democracy. And these are the people who kind of will serve and make decisions on behalf of the people. Now, keep in mind, they do still have a king and a queen at this point, but they also have Parliament, which is split up into two houses. Now, the thing that was unique around this point in time is they had a constitutional monarchy. And so this was kind of a big deal here because that means that Britain had kind of left this absolute rule, and they create a constitution which gives the people of Great Britain or England power as citizens. And this is all kind of thanks to that whole Enlightenment era that we talked about. But they do still have a king and queen. They do have a representative form of government under their Commonwealth. But the king is still pretty powerful here. One of the things that we mentioned in just any kind of, especially like our senior government class, is habeas corpus. So this idea of bring forth the body. So the rule of law, a person, or we'll say rule of law, it's just the idea that a person cannot be held in prison without just cause or without a trial. This is going to start becoming a thing prior to this revolution. Because of the Enlightenment era, people were starting to question cruel and unusual punishment. Remember, we talked about in class a little bit how, we have like things like the racks or just this harsh punishment for people who are convicted of crimes, even if they're not fully convicted of crimes. At this point in time during England's history, they would actually torture. Torture was a form of getting information if they needed to get information about someone who was guilty or they assumed was guilty, or they just were trying to cause disarray with the people. So cruel and unusual punishment is something that's going to be such a big deal that the framers of the United States Constitution actually, or the Anti-Federalists actually called for an amendment outlawing cruel and unusual punishment, and that's how big of a deal it is. So this is the idea here, thanks to the Enlightenment thinkers, that someone or each person has value, and there are limits to what you can do to these people. So in 1707, they have the Act of Union, which this officially unites England and Scotland into Great Britain. Now, for this, I want to kind of explain England's or Great Britain's government a little more in depth. So I do have a little video real quick that I'm going to show you. Hopefully it won't get copyright striked, but let's play that really quickly.
Healthcare, education, the environment, international aid, crime. Issues affecting all our lives are shaped and driven by Parliament. But how did it all begin? What does Parliament do all day, and how do you fit in? Parliament has evolved throughout its long history to become what it is today, changing over time to meet the needs of the people. Two key historical events began this process. In 1215, King John put his seal on Magna Carta and agreed to a list of 63 rules set out by a group of barons. This ensured for the first time that no one, not even the king, was above the law. 50 years later, Simon de Montfort, for the first time, invited representatives of the towns and shires to his 1265 Parliament. These events established the foundations for the representative democracy we have today, and from this point onwards, the power to make decisions for the nation passed, over time, from the monarch to Parliament. Let's take a closer look at the UK Parliament today. Parliament is made up of three parts: the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the monarch. The House of Commons is the elected chamber of Parliament. It debates big issues, proposes laws, amends existing ones, and challenges the government's work. There are 650 members of Parliament, or MPs, who each represent a constituency in the UK. They belong to either a political party or are independent, and are elected by constituents of the area they want to represent. The leader of the party that has the most MPs elected after a general election becomes the Prime Minister and heads up the government. They choose a cabinet made up of 20 senior ministers, who coordinate each government department's work. Parties not in power are called the opposition. MPs from the opposition and government question the government on policy and proposed laws. The Speaker keeps the House in order by chairing these debates. The House of Lords is the second chamber and shares the making and shaping of laws with the House of Commons. It has around 800 members, and it's made up mostly of life peers, and also includes hereditary peers and bishops. Lords are selected for their knowledge and experience, and hold government to account by using their expertise to look at laws and issues in detail. The monarch's role is mainly ceremonial. They meet the Prime Minister once a week to hear what's going on in Parliament and formally agree every new law. But that's not all. There are also people working behind the scenes who support the work of Parliament: clerks, librarians, researchers, and many more. The government has been elected to run the country, and Parliament holds the government to account for us, the public. But how? Prime Minister's questions and ministerial questions give MPs and Lords the opportunity to challenge the government's policies. It's in these debates that they can share the views of their constituents and the public and how new policies may affect them. Another important way Parliament can scrutinise or look in detail at the work of government is through select committees. Select committees analyse and scrutinise policy. They're made up of either MPs, Lords, or a mixture of both. Together, committee members look at a particular subject and make recommendations on improvements. Witnesses with expertise in the area under scrutiny are called to give evidence, which is used to help shape the committee's inquiry. Members of the public, like you, with a view on the subject can also give evidence for consideration. At the end of an inquiry, a committee writes a report with recommendations that the government usually responds to within 60 days.
This is going to show you the people who were involved during the English Civil War.
Both houses in Parliament share responsibility
for making and shaping laws. He becomes king in 1603 after the death of
where do laws come from in the first place? A bill is a proposal for a new law, or to change an existing law, and comes from lots of places, like governing and opposition parties, public inquiries, civil servants, or campaign groups. So how does an idea...
and we've also talked about James I in some of our previous notes, so they kind of are going to overlap. So all of this stuff is kind of taking place at the very same time. Charles I, he is son of James I. He becomes king in 1625. So we go from James to Charles. He marries a Catholic, a sister of Louis XIII of France. Then we get into William Laud. He is named Archbishop of Canterbury by Charles I. So he is part of the Catholic Church. Oliver Cromwell, he is the leader of parliamentary forces in the English Civil War. He is also named Protector or Lord Protector of England in 1653. Remember, that's that word Lord there, so he would be in the House of Lords. Charles II, he is the son of Charles I, and he is known as the Merry Monarch. Again, notice they have their feet on that pillow there. James II, he is the brother of Charles II. He became king in 1685. I know this is complicated, just stick with me. We get into William and Mary. They're going to be kind of the ones that are widely known. Mary is the daughter of James II. The guy's name is William of Orange. He is also the ruler of the Netherlands. They became queen and king in 1688. Queen Anne. She becomes queen in 1702, and there are no children to succeed her. So these are like the lineages of kings and queens of England. Okay. Sophia, she is the granddaughter of James I, and she married a German, Hanover. George I, he is the son of Sophia. He becomes king in 1714. He is German and cannot speak English. Sir Robert Walpole, he becomes the first Prime Minister of England. He acted as an advisor to George I and George II. George II is king in 1727. George III, he becomes king in 1760. He is the grandson of George II. George III is also going to be the king that is in power during the American Revolution. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind there. So the roots of the Civil War, Queen Elizabeth dies in 1603. There was a relationship with Parliament between the Queen and Parliament. It was typically good at this point. She tried to work with Parliament, and they also tried to work with her, so it was beneficial to both sides. Now, it says the English Civil War grows out of an ongoing conflict between successive monarchs and Parliament. So remember, we have this kind of absolute power where the kings and queens feel like they should have this authoritarian rule, they should have absolute power, and Parliament really represents the people. If you recall earlier in the slides, we talked about the Commonwealth. So that kind of represents the people and their rights. And this, again, remember, all stems from this Enlightenment era. Okay, so Parliament wants more power. They are demanding power on behalf of the people. James I, he becomes king in 1603. Remember, he is the successor to Elizabeth I. He was not prepared to deal with a strong Parliament. He believed very fully in the divine right of kingship, which means that he felt like he was the ultimate ruler, the authoritarian ruler, absolute power, and that he should not have to share power with the people of Great Britain or England at this point. They were in constant need of money. He made poor foreign policy decisions, and he tried to marry his son to a Catholic, which really kind of made the people of England angry. We get into James and the Puritans. He was not sympathetic to Puritan reforms. He felt like they should just leave, carry them out of the land. And ultimately they do. They go and they settle in the Americas, North America to be exact. Charles I in 1625, during his rule, there was a continued decline in parliamentary relations. He was given less money than he asked for warfare, because what you need to know about Parliament is they kind of handle the money. So as they were kind of coming up with the budget, he proposed, how much he wanted for warfare. They didn't give him what he asked for. So it says that Charles wanted to dissolve Parliament. He decided he just wanted to get rid of the whole thing. So he forces loans, building of troops, and martial law. Now, what you need to know about martial law, it means that the military is pretty much like becoming the police force. They are on the corners, they are on, in the town square. They're just pretty much posted up everywhere. And it starts to kind of create this tense situation between the government, the king, and the people. So Parliament, they seek revenge. They form or write the Petition of Right. In return for money for war, Charles must sign away some powers. So this is something that kind of leads up to the English Bill of Rights. So one of the things that they include in the Petition of Right, they say that he cannot tax without Parliament's consent. So he cannot just, throw out these crazy taxes on the people of England unless he has gone through Parliament first. Another thing that he talks about, or that the Petition of Right mentions, is no unjust imprisonment. And so this is kind of now getting into a question of what is considered cruel and unusual punishment. Remember I told you about the Enlightenment. These people are starting to question, government. They're starting to say, we have natural rights that were given to us by God, and that we value and we are important. So they say no quartering of troops without consent, because that was something that was common at this point. It means that if there was ever a need for the troops to be quartered, as in given housing and shelter, they could just force the soldiers or force the people, the citizens of England, to house these soldiers. So imagine you're sitting there in your living room, and you've got 14 sweaty soldiers just sitting in your house, and you're forced to let them sit in there with you. Okay, so that was kind of a big deal. They also stated that there should be no martial law without war. So why would you have martial law in peacetime? That was a big thing that the people pointed out. So Charles does not learn from the past, and he tries to dissolve Parliament again. He rules for 11 years without Parliament, and he ignores the provisions of the Petition of Right. So this is going to cause a lot of controversy, and it's going to create a lot of tension between the people and the king. We get into Charles and William Laud. They are responsible for persecution of the Puritans. They attempted a religious invasion in Scotland. In 1640, the Scots invade England, and Charles needs money to fight. So what does he do? He calls Parliament. Parliament responds by criticizing the crown, which is not a good look. It shows that there's not unity between the country. This all dissolves after 3 weeks. It is a short Parliament meeting. Okay, so they call Parliament into session just for this reason, and then it only lasts for 3 weeks, and again, there's no more Parliament. Charles still has no money. So again, he calls Parliament. Now, Parliament at this point lasts for 20 years, so that's a lot longer. It was dominated by the Puritans, and they expand the power of Parliament, which curtails Charles' taxation machine, because remember we said at this point they wanted to all kind of tax on the people. All of that needed to go through Parliament before the king could just tax the citizens. So this gets rid of his taxation machine, where he was just taxing people left and right trying to make money. So he executes the Archbishop Laud, and he also passes a law that guaranteed Parliament would meet. So this is trying to kind of troubleshoot and trying to make things a little more peaceful. Now, it's going to be big trouble on the horizon. The Irish are upset over religion. They're mostly Catholic, and they're also upset over land issues, so they rebel in 1641. Scots aren't too happy with religious policies either. Okay, so again, remember there's this disunity between religious beliefs. You've got Puritans, you've got Catholics, you've got Protestants, you've got Church of England, and they're all kind of in dispute. This is where we get to the royalists in Parliament. So some members of Parliament are actually pro-monarchy, and they are anti-Puritan because the monarch did not support Puritans at this point. In 1642, we have the 19 Propositions. So this document states that Parliament is the supreme power in England. Charles has a response to this, and he said that he is going to attack. So what does he do? He leads troops into the House of Commons, and this is seen as the first act of war. Remember from the video and from the notes earlier, the House of Commons are people, representatives, who are elected to make decisions and pass laws on behalf of the citizens of England. So when he sends troops into this House of Commons, it is seen as a first act of war because he is declaring war on the actual citizens of England. You have a group known as the Cavaliers. They are pro-monarchy, and they are geographically from the north and the west of England. You also have the Roundheads. They are pro-parliament. This group is led by Oliver Cromwell. So the Roundheads are kind of like, they're against the king, okay? So the war ends by 1646. The Cavaliers surrenders. Charles is actually caught, and he is tried and executed. So this is kind of the result of the English Civil War. Charles is caught and executed. So if you look at the burial mound here, it says King Charles I, 1625 to 1649. The bronze statue was made in 1633. It was acquired for the crown and set up here. The carved work of the pedestal being executed by Joshua Marshall, but that's just like the little transcript. It's not his actual burial site. At this point, after Charles is executed, there is no more monarchy, and Parliament declares a commonwealth. So this is this representative style government. Cromwell takes over. He is named Lord Protector. He dismisses Parliament and rules as a military dictator in England for 5 years. During this time, it's marked by his strict Puritan laws. Because he was a Puritan, he didn't believe in drinking, dancing, or gambling. He dies in 1658. His son Richard takes over, but he's gone in less than a year. And the long session of Parliament is recalled, and plans for a return of a monarch are made. Remember, Hobbes actually was for a monarchy. So at this point, the crown is restored. This is known as the Restoration. People were tired of the puritanical rule of Cromwell, so they decided they didn't like Catholicism. Church of England was okay, but we think Puritan is way too far. We don't want to do that. Parliament was steadfast in its newfound power. Charles II accepted the conditions and returns as king. He was a merry monarch. He was known as a socialite, supporter of the arts. He was also pretty outgoing. Charles II was probably a Catholic in secret because of his mother, but he also supported religious toleration because, you don't want to make these people mad again. They just got rid and executed the last guy, so you're trying to just kind of meet everybody where they are. There is the Clarendon Code. This is aimed at promoting Church of England as the state church. This has a disastrous effect on the Puritans because, remember, they were kind of already at odds anyway because of Cromwell, and now the Church of England is going to be kind of the state or the country church, and the Puritans are going to be starting to be kicked out. We get to the constitutional monarchy. This is the restoration of the crown. It created a constitutional monarchy, which means that now there is this constitution in place to protect the citizens of England. We have a House of the Commonwealth. So we have representatives who speak on behalf of the people, make decisions on behalf of the people. We no longer have an absolute ruler who is able to just do whatever they want and, kill whoever they want, torture whoever they want. The citizens are now claiming that they have rights, natural rights that are given to them. So Charles II, he learns from Charles I's mistakes, and he is trying to kind of appease everybody. Also during this time, there's growth of political parties, mainly due to fear of Catholicism. There is a London fire, a big fire that goes through London. They blame it on the Catholics. Charles has no heirs, but James II is going to be in line because he is Catholic. And this is going to be a big deal because, again, we go back into Catholicism versus Puritanism. So I told you that religion really does play a big part in the development of a lot of these countries. So the two major political parties that we talk about in England at this point are the Whigs and the Tories. And you will see the Whig Party play a role in United States history, but they don't last very long. So the Whigs, they support the idea. They don't want Catholics as a king. The Tories feel like that the hereditary monarchy should continue. So the Whigs are saying, no, we don't think that James is a king. We don't think that he should be king because he's Catholic. The Tories say, no, we should continue the lineage, so James should be king. But they have a compromise. So habeas corpus is another increase in individual liberty. And again, that is no cruel and unusual punishment, so they get rid of that. In 1685, James II, he is declared king. He followed similar policies to James I in regard to dealing with Parliament. James has a son, and Parliament can't wait any longer. So this is when they start to basically rebel. Okay, this is where we're going to see this big kind of fight. So the Whigs and Tories unite against James II. They support William and Mary. This is known as the Bloodless Revolution. So William and Mary become king and queen in 1689. They swear to govern in accord with Parliament. And this is where we get to the English Bill of Rights, which I have an activity that we'll do on this. It guarantees certain individual rights to the people of England. So this gives them acknowledgement. You know, you have certain rights. Remember John Locke, he talked about the right to life, liberty, and property. And so this is going to be along the same lines. It's going to make sure that the people of England are guaranteed rights as individuals. We have the Act of Settlement. No Catholic sits on the throne, so because they really don't like Catholics, okay? They wanted, Protestants. So Irish Catholics are actually excluded from government altogether. And then Protestant minority rules Ireland. Queen Anne, she takes over in 1702. Parliament also, during her rule, makes greater gains. We have the Act of Union in 1707. It creates Great Britain out of Scotland and England under Queen Anne's rule with advice from the cabinet. So this was actually kind of under her rule. They created this union between Scotland and England, and that is where we get the term Great Britain, and that exists today. George the First in 1714 of Hanover, he relies more on the cabinet. He's also German. He, as the head of the cabinet, becomes the prime minister. He chooses the new prime minister, Sir Robert Walpole. So the prime minister kind of acts as like a little bit like their president in a way. It's kind of hard to explain, but that is someone that is typically selected by the members of the Commonwealth. The king doesn't really have anything to do with that. Well, I don't know if they do today, but they didn't really, not really today. So King George II in 1727. The prime minister's powers continue to grow. They actually start to function as a chief executive. So like I said, they are looked at kind of like a president that we have in the United States. That would be kind of the same thing in Great Britain. And then George III in 1760. Now at this point, we have colonization happening. We have the American colonies that are already existing. England owns all of those. So England at this point is the dominant world power. However, domination is costly. The cost result in a colonial rebellion in America because he did not give the people in the colonies any representation in Parliament. And that was the big issue, no taxation without representation. So even though he could not tax the people of England and Great Britain without consent from Parliament, he was going crazy as far as taxes on the colonists. And so this ultimately leads to a rebellion in America, and we'll get on to that next.